1 Samuel 28. And it came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish said unto David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. And David said to Achish, Surely thou shalt know that what thy servant can do. And Achish said to David, Therefore will I make thee keeper of mine head forever. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. And the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by the prophets. Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment, and he went, and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die? And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. And Samuel said unto Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am so distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and he answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. Then said Samuel, Wherefore then doest thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy? And the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me, for the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to David. Because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Then Saul fell straightway all along on the earth, and was so afraid because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all the day, nor all the night. And the woman came unto Saul, and saw that he was so troubled, and said unto him, Behold, thine handmaid hath obeyed thy voice, and hath put my life in my hand, and have hearkened unto thy words which thou spakest unto me. Now therefore I pray thee, hearken thou also unto the voice of thine handmaid, and let me set a morsel of bread before thee, and eat, that thou mayest have strength when thou goest on thy way. But he refused and said, I will not eat. But his servants, together with the woman, compelled him, and he hearkened unto their voice. So he arose from the earth and sat upon the bed. And the woman had a fat calf in the house, and she hasted and killed it, and took flour and kneaded it, and did bake unleavened bread thereof. And she brought it before Saul and before his servants, and they did eat. Then they rose up and went away that night. Brother Mike, do you want to pray for the service?
Lord, thank you for this church, and thank you for allowing us to gather together to hear your word. I thank you for your word as well. Please put your spirit upon Brother Eric as he brings us tonight's message, and please let each one of us learn something. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right, I love this story here. Here we are watching a child of God, Saul, who is a saved man, go and dabble in the occult and familiar spirits. And this story, the reason I like it is because, honestly, a lot of people can relate to this. People get fearful and they just start doing things out of desperation because they're not right with God. And, God's children can be that way. And that's exactly where we see Saul at. And you can notice throughout the entire chapter we just read that Saul is he's worrisome, he's fearful, and he's just kind of at wit's end. Like, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? Oh, man. And instead of crying out to the Lord, and if you look back at verse, where's it at here? Let's see. I might have lost myself here, but if you look back at verse 13, what's funny to me that I kind of laugh at is this whole time leading up to verse 13, it's talking about how he's worried, he's scared. I'm looking for where he inquired of the Lord, but the Lord didn't answer. Which verse was that? I just missed it. 6. Yeah, verse 6. So pay attention to that right there in verse 6. Let's read it real quick. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. And really, this was just probably a simple, just like, Lord, what am I going to do? Help me out, right? It wasn't sincere, because if it were sincere, God, I believe, would have answered him. And we're going to see later on in Chronicles that when it comes back to this, that in Chronicles it says that he did not inquire of the Lord, meaning that it wasn't a real sincerity of inquiring of the Lord. And you can see that because he's just as we, as children of God, when we get back into sin, the world and things, fear can start to kind of take over our faith, really. Not that our faith goes anywhere, it just kind of starts to cast a little bit of a shadow over this fear. And perfect love casts out all fear. We know that from the Bible. So when you're walking lockstep with God and you're doing the things of the Lord, fear just kind of goes away. You're sitting with the Lord, right? What do you have to fear except for him, right? And what's funny is he's fearful all the way up, and then go down to verse 13. And the king said unto her, "Be not afraid. What sawest thou?" Because the witch of Endor, she cries out and she's afraid of what she sees. And obviously it's a surprise to her because this was something that wasn't normal. Even though she had these familiar spirits, right? If this wasn't a normal thing, this was definitely something that was divine that God ended up using against Saul to actually, deliver this message to him. And the title of the sermon is The Occult and Familiar Spirits. That's the title of this. We are around Halloween. So you got to get that Halloween sermon in there. And this is about the occult, familiar spirits, worshiping death, the death cult that's around us, and those kinds of things. So that's why we're kind of looking at this story. But again, I just think it's funny because here Saul is afraid the whole time. And then this witch, she sees this vision. And then he's saying, be not afraid. And it's like, you're afraid, Saul. That's why you're here. Like, what, are you kidding me? So anyway, we'll kind of get into this. Our Christian walk and our Christian life, and I emphasize Christian because we're saved, okay? So we're past salvation. This is the life living in separation, being holy as our God is holy, trying to live that perfect life, seeking what's right and to live a righteous life. We are called to be in the world, but not of the world. We must establish God's standard for our lives, one of absolute holiness, the rejection of all fear, and the uncompromising pursuit of goodness. Today, we will examine the divine commands that govern our spiritual walk, forcing us to ask, if we claim to follow the Lord of the Lord, what is our responsibility regarding practices rooted in death and fear? God is the God of the living. Why is Saul seeking amongst the dead, going to a witch of Endor for answers when he has the God who's alive and the God of the living? So why would you seek the dead? And he's fearful. It all ties right hand in hand here, that when you're walking away from the Lord, that fear right there. And Jesus even mentioned it quite a bit in the Gospels. You have little faith, they're afraid on the boat and everything. It's like you're with God himself. Like don't be afraid. Don't fear not, right? Foundation of our walk must be a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind, which is entirely incompatible with the works of darkness. And we should always ask ourselves these questions before we do anything or we're involved in anything. Does this honor and glorify God? Would God approve of this? If Jesus were physically standing right next to you, would you be doing the things that you're doing? I mean, this goes in all aspects of our Christian life. Is this pleasing to God? We know that only by faith we can please God. So, is this pleasing to God what we're doing? And again, this is just a broad spectrum, anything that we're doing. And then another question we can ask ourselves, am I being an ambassador or representative of Christ to the lost? Is my example a good example of Christ to the world, or am I just looking more like the world? So we should ask ourselves these questions, and we're going to get in here to this doctrine of separation and purity. So the foundational truth governing a believer's conduct is the absolute duty to live a life of holiness and separation from all unrighteousness. We are a holy people called to separation. Turn to 2 Corinthians 6:14. Keep your place in 1 Samuel 28. 2 Corinthians 6:14. You know, we apply this verse a lot to relationships, between, boyfriend and girlfriend that are, or people about to get married or anything, be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. We apply that there, but this also goes just in general, because I heard it once said that it's a lot easier for somebody to pull you down to their level than you to lift them up. So if you're in a crowd of people that are doing unrighteous things and they're not doing the things that you ought to be doing, and you're just hanging around and piling around them, it's a lot easier for you to join in what they're doing rather than you to influence them. So right here in 2 Corinthians 6:14, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? Turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. The nature of God's Spirit is opposed to fear. The very nature of God's Spirit is opposed to fear. And if we're his children, we ought not fear because we have him. We're on his side. So what is there to be afraid of other than him? 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And right there, he's not giving us a spirit of fear. I kind of keep that in my back pocket anytime you get worrisome, even, because worry and anxiety is also a type of fear. You're fearing an outcome or fearing what's not there and right in front of you, and you can't really see ahead of you. But really, we need to suppress that and fear not and turn to God and know that fear is not from him. We have the spirit of life within us, and we shouldn't have that spirit of fear. The command to avoid evil and its appearance. Turn over to 1 Thessalonians 5:22. This verse here can even get to some really even basic levels. Like this verse reminds me of you guys know that water liquid death. I'm talking about the liquid death. Have you ever seen that water? It's a can of water. It looks like a beer can, doesn't it? Looks like a beer can, right? Well, it has a skull on there, and it's called liquid death. And the reason for the skull is because it kills your thirst. And I'm like, it does. For one, it doesn't look good. Like it just looks like beer. It looks like a beer can. But the other part is, let me just read the verse first, and then we'll go into that. But abstain from all appearance of evil. Now that water is probably good. It probably tastes good and everything, but it's like I'm not going to drink out of a can with a skeleton on there that looks like a beer can. Because if somebody were to see me or something, they'd be like, man, I saw Eric drinking a Michelob Light or whatever it might be. I don't know. It just looks like one of those white bottle or white cans. And then the other thing is like there's a skull and death on it. It's just strange. And so anyway, just simple things like that. And I've heard even people like talking about root beer. Those root beer bottles, they look like a beer bottle. Like even some people go to the extreme to like not drink a root beer bottle just because it's like, I don't want anybody seeing me afar thinking I'm just pounding back beer bottles, So abstain from all appearance of evil. It's just right there, plain right in front of our face. All appearances of evil, right? The context of this, abhorring wickedness. We should hate the things God hates. And death is a serious thing. We should take death seriously in this life. And it's a sad thing too, because people that die without Christ, they spend eternity in hell and there's no coming back. It's over for them. Just like the rich man in Lazarus' bosom, or Abraham's bosom, that whole story there, right into hell. And all he was wanting somebody to do is just go tell my brothers so they don't come into this place of torment, this flame, right? So, the command to abstain from the appearance of evil is rooted in the very character of God. Our actions must be governed by a spiritual principle that detests the source of all evil. Just a quick dictionary definition of evil. This is one of the definitions. That which is contrary to the laws of God. Deviation from rectitude, badness, and wickedness. And then also wickedness, just defining it in Webster's 1828, moral corruption, a departure from the rules of the divine law, evil practices, and sin. And going back to the Witch of Endor and these familiar spirits and people going to psychics and mediums and all this stuff, it's one of those things that God is saying no, not only just because he doesn't want you to do it, and that should be good enough for us. Just black and white, he doesn't want you to do it. But on the other hand, it's also like you're going to get yourself in trouble. You're going to get yourself hurt because whatever entities and evil spirit, they don't want good for you. So it's also, there's a protection factor in this too. So, the practices that we avoid are precisely the wickedness that God condemns as an abomination. So we'll get in some of these. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 18. This is the rebuking of the occult and darkness, the prohibition of occult practices, witchcraft, and seeking the dead. And again, Saul, a child of God, a saved man who we will see in heaven one day, goes to a witch of Endor, and we see the hypocrisy because he knows God's law. He actually is the one who enforced God's law back in verse 3 in 1 Samuel 28. Deuteronomy 18 is where I'm going to have you guys turn, Deuteronomy 18. I'm going to read 1 Samuel 28, verse 3. Yeah. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him at Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. See, even Saul was getting rid of those Catholic priests, those wizards. But anyway, right there in verse 3 in 1 Samuel, it shows and reinforces the fact that, hey, Saul knows better. Saul should not be going to this witch of Endor. He knows better. So his hypocrisy right there, he got rid of them all. So go to Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 through 12. We'll look there. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. These references here, it's the clearest and most direct prohibition against all forms of the occult and witchcraft. It labels these practices as an abomination unto the Lord, showing his absolute hatred for them. Turn over to Exodus 22:18, and then we're going to go to Leviticus 20, verse 27. Exodus 22:18. It's kind of crazy because out soul winning, we run into witches quite a bit around here. Like, I say quite a bit, but it's like every now and then you get one. We had one a couple weeks ago, and they just come out and say they're a witch. Then we had a lady that was a Church of Christ, Colton and I, last week when we were out soul winning, and she opened the door and says, "Oh, I was baptized in the Church of Christ," and but she's a witch. And I'm like, okay, well, Exodus 22:18. So here we are. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Okay. This verse included in the Mosaic Law demonstrates the severity with which God views the practice of witchcraft. It was a capital offense because it was also just a spiritual adultery against God. You were turning from a living God who is the God of life unto darkness and death is what's going on, for some kind of answer or reasoning. And it's going to most likely be a lie. And the reason I have kind of the familiar spirit in this story, the familiar spirit highlighted, is because people think that they go to these things and talk to like family members and stuff like that. But familiar spirits, in definition, we're going to get to here in just a second, they mimic. It's called a mimicker. You've probably heard this just throughout time. Mimickers, they mimic the dead that might be familiar to you, so that you would try to get some kind of faith in this thing, some kind of faith in this whole death cult deal. And it's wickedness and it's evil and it's confusing. And, you're turning away once again from light to darkness, which is what we see Saul do. And there's a huge consequence Saul pays for this. And we're going to see that here soon. Leviticus 20, verse 27. A man also or a woman or woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. Catholic priest, familiar spirits, where was that again? Sorry. Oh, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. Reasons for reference. The passage reinforces the ultimate penalty for seeking contact with familiar spirits, the dead, which is the very theme of the original Samhain festival. Anybody know what Samhain is? Anybody heard of that? Okay, so we're going to get into Samhain. The word looks like Samhain, but it's Samhain. Okay, and it's a Celtic festival. We're going to get into that here in a minute. Isaiah 8:19. Go ahead and turn there. This is a great verse. It's actually it has like a rhetorical question built into it. Exactly what we've been talking about, the theme of why are you going to the dead when you have the living God? So Isaiah 8:19. And when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God? For the living to the dead? You know, you're going from the living to the dead. Why? You know, and it's a powerful rhetorical rebuke, asking why people would seek guidance from the dead when they should seek the living God. And, you know, just like Saul here, he's in sin. He hasn't really had that repentant heart of the child of God to just go to God and get things right. He's still, even though he kind of made up with David, he really didn't. He's freaking out. He's scared, which also shows he's not close to God, doesn't have that closeness with God. You know, and he's going to seek this and just putting God on the back burner. And it's a sad story. It's really sad. Kind of lost my train of thought what I was going to say about Saul there. Sorry. Understanding familiar spirits. You know, a familiar spirit in definition is a demonic entity that works in close association with a medium. The word familiar is derived from the Latin familiaris, which is a meaning a household servant or acquaintance. So there's 2 points to this familiar spirit, a demonic servant. It is intended to convey the idea that a medium or sorcerer has a spirit or demon acting as their servant, ready to obey their commands. So there's this whole game going on between this medium and this demonic servant, familiar spirit. And point 2, being a mimicker with deception, a mimicker. This practice relies heavily on deception, as these demonic entities mimic the spirits of the dead to deceive people into believing they are communicating with loved ones. Okay, so that's typically what people have. Oh, I want to go talk to my dead grandma. You know, and it's like, well, you know what? Especially if you're a Christian, it's like you're going to see grandma if she was saved, so don't worry about it. You'll see her again. You should be seeking God, and that's the thing is, you know, we should be seeking the Lord and not amongst the dead. Here's some of the biblical example: King Saul's desperation and divine discipline. Go back to 1 Samuel 28. 1 Samuel 28. And then when you get there, just page over to 1 Samuel 16, because we're going to see the Spirit of the Lord departing from Saul. So we'll read 1 Samuel 16, 14, and 15. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. So right there we see this is where God's fellowship and Saul's fellowship break. The relationship has been broken. And again, I believe if Saul had a really truly repentant heart, I think that God would probably have healed him, but he didn't. You know, he did not really sincerely and earnestly seek God and just submit to God's plan that David's taken over. If he would just submitted and said, "Okay, you know, I'm on the right page with you, Lord," but he didn't. So God's silence and man's rebellion. The story of King Saul seeking the medium at Endor is a tragic illustration of spiritual rebellion and the danger of turning to the occult. Saul was the Lord's anointed, a man who, though later rejected by God as king, was knowledgeable of the law. That's where we saw the hypocrisy just a minute ago. The Mosaic law strictly forbade seeking guidance from familiar spirits, ranking it as a capital offense and an abomination. It's a capital offense, all right, and also Saul meets his capital offense. And we're going to see that here in just a minute. 1 Samuel 28:6. Go to 1 Samuel 28:6. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. You know, this is showing that fellowship's been broken. There's no sincerity here. We're going to go to Chronicles next. Go ahead and turn to 1 Chronicles 10, 13, 14. We already read where Saul knows the law and was already getting rid of the wizards and witches and all that, as per God, doing it rightfully. 1 Chronicles 10, verses 13 and 14. I'm going to read 1 Samuel 28:18. Because thou obeyedest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. And this is what the witch of Endor, God using this situation to actually deliver a message to Saul, like, okay, you want to play with fire, buddy? You got burned. You are going to die tomorrow, you and your sons, and you'll be with me. Okay? And that's what we're going to see here in First Chronicles. This kind of tells that in a summary of what happens here. Verse 13, 1 Chronicles 10, verse 13. So Saul died for his transgression which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord, which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire of it, and inquired not of the Lord. Again, that's signifying that his first inquiry was not sincere. Therefore he slew him and turned the kingdom unto David, the son of Jesse. And this verse explicitly states that seeking the medium was one of the primary transgressions that led to his death and judgment. Had Saul not done this and just turned to the Lord sincerely, maybe he would have lived out the rest of his life, with David and under David or something. We don't know. But he didn't. He chose fear. He chose to turn from the Lord and turn to a witch that he knew better. And he got a message, didn't he? Go over to 1 Samuel 31. We're going to read verses 1 through 6. We're going to see his death come to fruition, him and his sons. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down, slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons. And the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, Saul's sons. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him. So he got hit with an arrow, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then Saul said unto his armor bearer, Draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. There's his death. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword, and died with him. So Saul died and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men that same day together. There's Saul and his son's death that was prophesied by Samuel, the Lord allowed, through the witch of Endor, who also, once again, that witch, this was a different experience. She's not experienced this before. That's why she was scared. She cried out in fear, because this was something that the Lord was like, okay, you want to mess around, buddy? You want to play with this stuff? It's on. You're going to die tomorrow, you and your sons. So this is the thing that we shouldn't be seeking after death, or the things of this world that they glorify, such as Halloween and the occult practices. Now, I have nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with getting together and having a chili cook-off, throwing some candy at each other, whatever we got to do. There's all these things out there to kind of pull people away from the actual festivities and things like that. But people have their yards decked out and death and all kinds of stuff you walk through. There's one over, I can't say where it's at, I guess. But anyway, it's over in Lake St. Louis, and it's just full of like hanging corpses all over the whole yard. I'm like, whoa, like it's just crazy. It's just a crazy thing. So anyway, the celebration of death. So let's see, where's I at here? So we see their death. Here's a theological distinction, if you want to call it that, the worldly fear versus godly fear. Saul was driven by the fear of man and the Philistine army. Now, Saul has seen God do great things throughout his entire king career, just the whole time. And he saw David, a ruddy boy, take out a giant, and it's like all of a sudden now he's afraid. Well, he's afraid because he's not on the Lord's side. If you just get on the Lord's side, you won't have to be afraid. Rather than him fearing the Almighty, the believer is commanded to fear God alone because he holds the ultimate power over both body and soul. Turn over to Matthew 10:28 and then Luke 12:5. Matthew 10:28 and Luke 12:5. These are great verses that Jesus tells us. This helps us to even in times of persecution, if unto death even, right? We shouldn't fear the person that would take our life, but we should rather fear God himself. Matthew 10:28, and fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. This verse gives that definitive command to fear God above all men, proving that the ultimate authority over life and death belongs to him. Luke 12:5, but I will forewarn you whom ye shall fear. Fear him. Oh, wait, to get turned there, sorry. Luke 12:5, but I will forewarn you whom ye shall fear. Fear him which after he hath killed hath power to cast into hell. Yea, I say unto you, fear him. This is reinforcing that sole authority of God over eternal destiny, proving that the worldly fear that drove Saul was misdirected. Saul was just misdirected. Again, I think if he would have just turned to the Lord, got on God's plan, he'd have been all right. But he didn't. He's still trying to do things his way. Here's something to think about too, where there might be grace, because I've heard stories of people that were before they were saved, they had dabbled in stuff like this, witchcraft and things like that, and they had gotten actually scared to the light. They were scared and you've probably heard this stuff too, right? Where it's like, it freaked them out so bad that they had no other choice to turn to God. They were just that afraid of what happened to them. So for an ignorant seeker, an ignorant unbeliever who might turn to these forbidden practices out of desperation, God may just use it, kind of like we saw the Witch of Endor used. He might use that to scare somebody into, salvation, in a sense. Maybe drives them to a soul winner or a church or somewhere to get the gospel, seeks them to get there. So he might do that. Maybe a severe warning to them, a demonic encounter that freaks them out bad enough to where they would get that warning. This is a terrible experience for some. Maybe the very confrontation with the reality of darkness needed to drive them to the light of the gospel for salvation. However, this is not an endorsement. The seeking itself is still forbidden. And this is just, I'm only saying this because an ignorant unbeliever might get by with some of this until they find what's true. However, a believer who knows better, just like we saw Saul, he knew better, and death was right there. God killed him for what he did. So the next day he died. He died to death. The final act in divine discipline, judgment of death, Saul's actions of consulting that medium was a willful act of spiritual adultery and rebellion. The immediate result of the visit was the prophecy of his impending doom. 1 Samuel 28:12. Go ahead and go back to 1 Samuel 28, verse 12. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. The medium's shock shows that this was not a normal manifestation of her familiar spirit. Her familiar spirit, right? She's used to seeing something else. But a divine intervention for the purpose of delivering a message of judgment. 1 Samuel, go to 28, verse 19. Verse 19. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. This is that prophecy of the death. We just read about his death and his son's death. The consequence of Saul's visit leads directly to his physical discipline, death on the battlefield, proving that turning from God's clear commands can result in the ultimate temporal judgment on a believer. We talk about this quite a bit. Believers can be taken out early, taken home, when things happen. That, when you disobey the Lord, you get to a certain point where it's like, all right, you're coming home. And that's that. And I don't think that Saul died a very fun death. He was fearful for his life, and then he had to fall on his sword by himself with his armor bearer. He probably would have rather died in his bed, next to his family and friends, and probably even David playing the harp. If he would have just stayed on the plan, died a good death. Maybe in an older age. But again, he sought the witch. 1 Thessalonians 11:30. Go ahead and turn there. 1 Corinthians 11:30. This is that reminder that even Christians, we can fall into these things when we're in disobedience, or if we don't have, if we're holding on to these unconfessed sins, especially knowingly, right? We know that we have something that we need to get fixed with the Lord. These kinds of things can happen to us as a believer. This morning we talked about Ananias and Sapphira and them just falling over dead for lying to the Spirit, and God making an example of them. And the whole church feared, by the way, when you read that story. The whole church feared, like, whoa. And that's New Testament. The people that were like, oh, the New Testament's not like that. It's like, man, these people were Christian believers in Jesus Christ, and they fell over dead. Like, God killed them. So 1 Corinthians 11:30. For this cause, many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. And that sleep there is talking about dying. And this is talking about taking communion unworthily, just like taking it lightly, thinking about the cross and not examining yourself. And when you take these things lightly, this is exactly what happened. People get sick, they get weak among us, and many sleep. People just die. And, this verse explicitly confirms that a believer's unjudged sin in this life can result in physical sickness and premature death, which is God's ultimate discipline for his own children. We should just take these things, and once we know him, we should take them, pack them in, and fear our Lord and love him and just serve him as best we can. The call to purity and rejection of fear, 1 Thessalonians 5:22. Abstain, you don't have to turn there, we already read this one, but abstain from all appearances of evil. Romans 12:9. Let love be without dissimulation. Abhor that which is evil and cleave to that which is good. Cleave to that which is good. Abhor that which is evil. If the Lord hates it, we ought to also. And if the Lord wouldn't like the practices of the world and us getting involved in them, then we shouldn't get involved in them. The verse is commanding us to abhor, detest, utterly hate that which is evil. The Christian's response to darkness should be a spiritual revulsion, not a joyous celebration. Romans 6:13. Neither yield ye your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto sin, but yield yourselves unto God, as those that are alive from the dead. We are alive from the dead. And your members as instruments of righteousness unto God. Glorifying death is prohibited because we are to present our bodies as instruments of righteousness, as those who are alive from the dead. And glorifying Halloween and all the death that's there. And once again, I understand that we get together and have chili cook-offs and try to get away from that, but there are people that really love death out there. They really love it. Dressing up as serial killers and murderers and wicked clowns and things like that. And the Wayne Gacy guy, he dressed up as a clown and had little boys. And it's crazy, that stuff. I don't even want to get into that darkness. But the day of darkness revealed here, we've spent the time establishing God's holy standard for our lives, that we must abstain from all appearance of evil, reject the spirit of fear, and abhor that which is wicked. We must apply these principles and this unchanging standard to a particular day of the calendar, which is Halloween that's coming up. It's a day whose spiritual foundation stands in direct rebellion against everything we have studied today. This day, the historical truth of Halloween, it's rooted in an ancient Celtic festival called Samhain. It looks like Samhain, and it's this Celtic festival where Druid priests honored the dead and believed that the barrier between the worlds of the living and the dead was lifted at this time because it was part of their New Year. So at this time, they thought the veil was thinner. And their whole reason that they dressed up in these animal skins and dressed as the dead is so that the dead wouldn't see them as who they really were. It was a guise or disguise. And the celebration involved fire rituals, costumes made of animal skins, and the belief of that evil spirits could roam the earth. The very act of wearing costumes was originally meant to disguise oneself from or appease the evil spirits and ghosts of the dead. So this is where this all comes from, this Halloween. And we'll just kind of go through brief history real quick. There's a spiritual conflict here to participate in the customs of this day. The costumes of darkness, the imagery of death, and the celebration of macabre is to lend credence to a holiday founded entirely on fear, death, and the occult. We cannot serve Christ and celebrate the spiritual system he died to defeat. There is one last enemy that Christ will defeat, and it's death. And that's his enemy. Death is his enemy. And he's going to defeat that enemy when he returns the kingdom back to God the Father. I think I wrote that verse down. It's actually turn over to 1 Corinthians 15:22. Yeah, it's 1 Corinthians 15:22. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. But every man in his own order, Christ the firstfruits, afterward they that are Christ at his coming. Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and power. For he must reign till he hath put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. That's the last enemy, is death. The Lord does not like death. We are to be made alive. He is the God of the living, and we should celebrate that and not celebrate death. Death is a serious thing. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Just reminding you of that. It directly opposes the spirit behind the practices we're discussing here. And just to give you kind of some of this Halloween history, where it comes from, our friends, the Catholics, are really heavily involved in this again. And I say friends loosely, right? It always comes up with these guys. It's celebrated October 31st, obviously. It's a holiday with origins spanning over thousands of years. People with ancient pagan rites, and then evolving through the influence of the Catholic Church, and then later immigrants. So the ancient Celtic roots of Samhain, again, it looks like Samhain, but it's called Samhain. The primary origin of Halloween is this ancient Celtic festival, Samhain, which is celebrated by the Celts in modern-day Ireland, the United Kingdom, and northern France. When this occurred, Samhain marked the end of summer and the harvest, and the beginning of a dark, cold winter, a time often associated with death. It was the Celtic New Year, which began on November 1st, meaning the festivities started on the eve of October 31st. And then here's the veil. This is what they call a veil. The Celts believed that on the night of Samhain, the boundary or veil between the world of the living and the spirit world was its thinnest, allowing spirits and ghosts and fairies to pass through. This is the Celts, which my ancestors, right? Great. Their traditions were bonfires. Large sacred bonfires were lit to ward off harmful spirits. They dressed in these costumes, animal heads and skins to disguise themselves as spirits, so the roaming entities would mistake them for one of their own. And then here's that's the origin of it, was the Celts. But here's where the Catholic and Roman influence comes from. As the Roman Empire expanded into Celtic territories, local traditions blended with religious observances. The most significant shift came with the Catholic Church's establishment of related holy days. So they had All Saints' Day, which is also called All Hallows' Day. In the 8th century, Catholic officials, namely Pope Gregory III, designated November 1st as the time to honor all Christian saints, martyrs, and confessors. And again, it's kind of funny, honor all Christian saints. Well, they have to give them sainthood. We know that as a believer, you're a saint, but they're honoring the ones that they claim are saints, just like that Satanist they recently just did from the 1800s. I don't know if you guys saw that or not. Some known Satanist who used to be a Catholic, they recently just made him a saint in their Catholic Church. Okay. Yep. Moving on. So, this day became known as All Hallows Day. This move is widely seen as an effect to supplant the popular pagan traditions of Samhain. All Souls Day, the Catholic Church later instituted All Souls Day on November 2nd. So what you have is the 31st, the 1st, and the 2nd, these 3 days that are kind of together as part of these festivities. The second day is a day for the faithful to commemorate all departed souls. Like, think about that. Again, the Catholics celebrating death, the departed souls. The name Halloween, the evening before All Saints' Day, October 31st, became All Hallows' Eve. Over time, this name was shortened to Halloween. The 3 days, All Hallows' Eve, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day, together form the season of All Hallowtide. So those 3 days, that's what the Catholics instituted for these 3 days, these festivities. And then obviously in our culture, the American evolution and modern customs, Halloween customs were largely brought to North America in the 19th century. So think about that, the 19th century, and guess by who? By a massive wave of Catholic, Irish, and Scottish immigrants. So they brought their lucky charms with them and all their superstitions and fears. And, of course, right? And I didn't know this about jack-o'-lanterns, but listen to this about jack-o'-lanterns. The tradition of carving lanterns originated in Ireland and Scotland using turnips or potatoes to ward off evil spirits, including the ghost of Stingy Jack. So I'm going to get into Stingy Jack. It's this crazy story that they created. Immigrants in America quickly adopted the pumpkin as preferred because it was easier to carve. So trick-or-treating, this custom evolved from several practices. This is where we get trick-or-treating from. Souling is what they call it. There's a medieval practice where poor people would go door to door on All Souls Day, one of those 3 days we just talked about, asking for food, and they'd call them soul cakes because what they would do is pray for their dead relatives. So in order to get a soul cake, you had to pray for their dead relatives. There's your trick or treat. So you're going to pray for the dead who's already dead, their doom's already there. You're praying for them. That's where this trick or treating comes from. And of course, we disguise that differently these days, don't we? So in exchange for praying for the homeowner's deceased relatives, they would receive soul cakes. It's called souling. Here's guising. The Scottish-Irish traditions of children dressing in costumes and visiting homes for food or coins. The modern practice of trick-or-treating took hold in the U.S. in the 1920s and 30s as a community-wide effort to divert youthful pranksters toward more benign activities. That's just kind of a historical opinion, but I guess the young youthful, they were just bored in the 20s and 30s and causing havoc, so they told them to go trick-or-treating. So here's the legend of Stingy Jack, where we get jack-o'-lantern. This is interesting. Stingy Jack is a figure from old Irish folklore whose story explains the origin of the carved lantern. He was a notorious drunkard and a trickster. Here's the legend of him. A bargain with the devil. This is what's crazy, is he made a bargain with the devil. Jack convinced the devil to turn himself into a silver coin to pay for drinks. So Jack convinced the devil to turn himself to a silver coin to pay for drinks. Jack then trapped the coin next to a silver cross in his pocket, of course, holding him down, right? Jack agreed to only free the devil if he promised not to claim Jack's soul for a year. So think about that. So he's given power, this story gives power to Satan, and you're going to see that. Watch what happens here. Then there's a second trap. 10 years later, Jack tricked the devil again. This is how the story goes. Tricked the devil again, convincing him to climb an apple tree and trapping him there by carving a cross in the trunk. Jack then forced the devil to promise never to take his soul to hell. So he again trapped the devil and, promised to never take his soul to hell. And then here's the eternal fate of Jack. When Jack eventually died, he was turned away from heaven due to his wicked life. So we know this is just crazy. And then, so he was turned away from heaven. So then the story goes, he was then turned away from hell by the devil, who despite his fury had to honor his promise, never to take Jack's soul. See how it's giving honor to the devil, this story of the jack-o'-lantern? Giving honor to the devil's going to keep his word. Like, well, I'd say I couldn't take your soul. So I'm not going to do that, because, I'm a good guy here, right? Like, come on, this is crazy. So this is where we get the jack-o'-lantern. Here's where it comes from. So now that Jack's in between, right? He's in this spiritual world. He's not in heaven. He's not in hell. He's just here to roam the earth with us, right? So the jack-o'-lantern. Condemned to wander the world for eternity in dark, Jack begged the devil for light. He begged the devil for light. So the devil tossed him a burning ember from hell, and Jack placed the coal inside a carved out turnip to use as a lantern. He became known as Jack of the Lantern, Jack-o'-lantern. You guys know that? That's where that comes from. This story gives honor to the devil. So anytime, and I didn't know this, but anytime we have jack-o'-lanterns up, we're actually giving honor to the story that the devil actually kept his word. Pretty wild if you think about it. So anyway, just a quick little history on Halloween, Hallows Eve. And again, we'll throw some chili down your throat and throw some candy at you guys. But celebrating death is definitely something we shouldn't be doing. We should adhere to the word, the words of the Lord, and always ask ourselves, does this honor and glorify God? Would God approve of this? Is this pleasing to God? And am I being an ambassador and a representative of Christ? And honestly, what I kind of think about this is if we turn the light on and let the kids come to the door, maybe just come with the Bible. Maybe that'll scare them. Like some people probably get scared of that. Like, don't go to that house. But hey, maybe you can get some soul winning done while you're waiting for them to come on by, right? And now that you guys know what jack-o'-lanterns are for. So anyway, we'll close in a word of prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this story. Thank you, Lord, for the Bible just has all the examples and anything that we're looking for or seeking out, Lord, we can always find some story to relate to our day and our life and our culture. And I'm just so thankful for that, Lord, that, we have these stories, and it's sad that it has to happen to certain people. And I know Saul is saved and we're going to see Saul in heaven one day. And, I just pray that be an example to us all that we shouldn't dabble in the fire. Otherwise we will get burned, and especially if we know better, Lord. And we just thank you so much for this church and all that you do for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, let's get to our next song here, our last song for the evening.